Have you ever wondered about white-tailed deer? Not just white-tailed, but incredibly all-white deer right here in the greater Western New York region. How did they get there? Why aren't they going away soon? And what was there before? Stay tuned, because on this issue of the Greater Western New York Report, we'll be bringing you live people who actually can tell you what's going on. That's right, you're watching the State of Greater Western New York Report, brought to you by...
Imagine yourself communicating with a difference. Pan-Dimensional Solutions helps you do this. Whether live spectator events, taped broadcasts, or real-time audience-engaging programs, you can benefit immediately from the tools Pan-Dimensional Solutions will share with you. Do you want to make a difference? Contact us at pandimensional.com. Welcome, everyone, to this edition of the State of Greater Western New York Report. Join us each episode as we discuss fantastic topics ranging from history to science to the strange and the wonderful, as well as the treasured spirit with which our region has infused America. We challenge you to consider all things Greater Western New York, from our region's very beginnings to how it inspires, how it empowers, and why it is so admired. Here's the host of the State of Greater Western New York Report, Chris Carosa.
Hi there, and welcome again to the State of Greater Western New York Report. I'm Chris Carosa, your humble host, bringing to you live once more what's going on in the state of the Greater Western New York region. With us today are a couple of very great and interesting guests that are going to explain something that maybe a lot of people don't know about, but they're curious to find out why. We're going to start with our first guest. His name is Truman Bells. He is the operations manager of Deer Haven Park, which is located in Seneca County. And within the park is a strange phenomenon, which he'll tell you all about. But first, hey, Truman, how are we doing today? We're a little bit flim-flammed here with the live production that we do things, and it's always strange and wonderful how things go when they're live. So you're up to bat first. Tell us a little bit about yourself and where the park is located, things like that.
Sounds good. Thank you, Chris. As Chris said, I'm Truman Bells. I'm the operations manager here at Deer Haven Park. Deer Haven Park is actually about 3,000 acres of property, which are on what used to be the Seneca Army Depot in upstate New York, actually in Seneca County. So when the Seneca Army Depot decided to close and go out, they needed to figure out what to do with the property. That was 1995. 2000, they started to turn it back over to the county. The county IDA was going to try to find people that could come in and do industry or repurpose the property. And they did. They found some buyers of the state prison. 5 Points is here. There are a couple of other businesses. But in 2016, they couldn't find a buyer for the majority of the property, so they put it up for bid. And the winner of the bid, Mr. Earl Martin, a local businessman here in Seneca Falls, he pledged to make a park or a refuge for some of the wildlife here, and more specifically, the white deer.
You know, the white deer, tell us a little bit about those. Why are some of the deer white? Now, not all the deer are white. I know going to Ithaca all the time, I would drive by the depot and I would always be looking. Probably not recommended when you're driving to turn your head this way to see if there's any white deer there. But they're not all white. Some of them are regular colored deer. But why are they white, and are they albino? I mean, that's a question that a lot of people ask because they seem like they're all white.
That's right, Chris. And you're right. I'm surprised there aren't more accidents along Route 96A, because if you don't know they're there and you're driving along and you happen to see a deer that's all white, it really is an incredible sight, and you have to do a double and sometimes a triple take. But no, they're not albino at all. In fact, albino deer, they lack pigment in all of their coat and their skin and their eyes. These are a very special type of deer, and it really is just genetics. It's all in the genes, and they call it leucism or leucistic. And deer aren't the only animals that can be born leucistic. There are many others, giraffes, even reptiles, alligators can be leucistic. But what it is, it's a gene, and basically it's like people being born with blonde hair and blue eyes. Blonde hair and blue eyes are caused by a recessive gene. Now, the majority of the genes that we as people have, or humans, are brown. They dictate brown hair, brown eyes. The same is true for deer. So when you have a parent, two parents that have that recessive gene and they mate, there's a possibility that the fawn could be born white. Now, there's also a possibility it will just be born brown. Now, when you have a white deer and they grow to maturity and they mate with another deer, the chances of having a white offspring become even more likely because they are already possessing not only the gene, but they are white in themselves. And if you have two white deer that mate, then it's almost always the case where they're going to have white offspring. So this chart here shows what happens when you have a brown deer and a white deer, or two brown deer. And then on the right side, what the likelihood is of having a deer being born all white, or just a carrier of that specific recessive gene. And what it is it's just a lack of pigment in the fur. It's as simple as that. And they're really special to us, but to nature, they're really not that special at all. In fact, it occurs quite often in the wild, but unfortunately, because they are white and they don't blend in with their surroundings, let's face it, Mother Nature made animals the color that they are so that they can blend in and be safe from predators. But the white deer, soon after they're born, typically, if they're not eaten or taken by natural predators, hunters will spot them and take them first.
Well, I suppose it's an advantage in the winter, at least. So it's
they do blend in a little better in the snow. That's correct.
So why are there so many? Given the fact that they're easy prey, why are there so many white deer at Deer Haven Park?
Well, we have to go back to 1941 before World War II, World War II actually started for us here in the United States. The president Eisenhower at the time, he was monitoring what was going on over in Europe, and they chose to go into a proactive preparedness state, which more specifically, he wanted to make a munitions depot in the Northeast, in the Southeast, in the Northwest, and in the Southwestern United States. So we could be protected on all fronts in the event of a war. And the spot they chose for the Northeast was right here in Seneca County, the Seneca Army Depot. When they built that in 1941, there's over 10,000 square acres within the property. And they built this place in a matter of months, not years, but months. And there's a 20+ mile fence that surrounds the perimeter. And that went up so fast that there were several herds of white-tailed deer inside that fence that was their home. They just chose never to go out or try to jump the fence, although they can. But more importantly, it kept predators out. In 1949-ish, late 40s, they spotted the first all-white buck. And it was very, very special, something that most of the folks here, military and civilian military, hadn't ever seen before. Very soon after that, there was a white fawn. And when they noticed that this was something that was occurring here naturally within the depot, the colonel said basically to all of his enlisted people, anybody caught harming any of these white deer, answer to me. So they were protected by the Army for all these years up until 2000 when they did leave.
Now we'll learn more about the history of the Seneca Depot in a moment when Walter Gable joins us. He's in the green room right now, as they say. But Truman, how many white deer are there? Have you ever done a head count or anything like that?
Yeah, it's very difficult to actually make a count of the deer. We use very various techniques. Aerial is one. You know, we actually fly planes, ultralights, and try to see what we can see from the air. Drones, but also just as productive is looking at the evidence on the ground, browse lines, and things like that, so we can tell. Near as we can tell for the white deer, we have about 65 to 70 white deer left here at Deer Haven Park. When at one time, while the military was in operation, there were estimated well over 300 white deer alone. And part of the downsizing or the decline in the numbers is due to them military going out, and they were no longer protected. The fence deteriorated. Poachers came in, broke down the fence, and it wasn't really kept up by the county. And predators came in. Some of them wandered out, got hunted, hit by cars, etc. So unfortunately, the numbers are way down. But as you can see in the picture, we have good news. Over the last 4 years, since Mr. Martin purchased the property, we've seen with our own eyes many white fawns being born. And this is a picture that was taken last week. And so far, we've seen 3 white fawns in the 3,000-acre park. So if we've seen 3 with our own eyes, we know there's a lot more. So we're very excited about that.
Well, we have a few minutes left. Tell us a little bit about how people might be able to see these things. Are these deer in cages or like a zoo, or do you just roam like it's a safari or something like that?
It's closer to a safari. That's right. In fact, like I said, it's 3,000 acres that Mr. Martin set aside for as a haven for the wildlife, not just the deer, but all the wildlife in general. And part of what he does, Mr. Martin will plant about 150 acres to 200 acres of corn, soybeans, grasses, and things like that for the wildlife to eat. Never planning to harvest it or anything, but this is all done to encourage the growth and keep the white deer specifically from disappearing. And if people want to come and see them, we have a few different ways you can do that. Our bus tours, unfortunately, due to COVID, have been put on temporary hold. We're looking very forward to being able to open them again here very soon. But we, because of COVID, came up with a new way to see the deer, and you take your own vehicle through the park, and it's called the auto tours. So you come to the park, to the visitor center, and we provide you with a virtual tour guide, which is a tablet that we have put an app on. And as you drive through the park, the geo coordinates of your vehicle will trigger photos and narrative about what you're seeing and what you're driving past. So you get a brief history of the former depot, and you also get a history of the white deer and a little bit of more than what I've told you here today of why they're here and why they're here and all of that. So, but the auto tours are. If they're single, it's $35. If you have the carload, it is $50 plus tax, and you can put 4, 5, 6 people in your car and go through. And no, we don't cage the animals. So we have a predetermined route. It's 8 miles long. Takes about an hour and a half if you take your time and look for the deer. We can't guarantee that you'll see the deer. This is their home. They go wherever they want to go, and we are visitors. But if you look hard enough, most of the people who go through the park do see the white deer.
So there's more than white deer there, though, right? I mean, they could see other animals at least.
Oh, yes. Yeah, there's we have white deer, we have turkeys, all kinds of birds, buzzards. We have actually a family of American bald eagles that have been returning to this area for at least 15 years, and they have an eagle nest here. They come back every year, and last year and this year they had 3 eaglets, so their family's getting larger.
Well, thank you very much, Truman. This is very interesting. Now stay with us, because in a moment we'll learn more about the history of the Seneca Army Depot. And I just made a mistake, but you don't realize it. Our guest will explain in a second. Stay with us. We'll come back after the break with the history of the Seneca Army Depot.
Through the mists of time, nature and man have both created and buried treasures beyond the imagination. With the ages, these riches slowly dissolve into mere myths until they are forever forgotten. But there are those brave souls who tirelessly cling to the truth, ever seeking to discover the undiscovered, to reveal what has always been there, to uncover the hidden gems of a land thought forsaken but loved by millions. 50 Hidden Gems of Greater Western New York. Discover the secrets in your own backyard. Buy your copy now at 50hiddengems.com.
Hi, and welcome back to the State of Greater Western New York Report. Today I'm with, and right now, I'm with Walter Gable. Walter is the Seneca County historian, and he's going to tell us a little bit about the story behind the Seneca Army, what do they call it, Walter?
Depot, not depot, but depot. The reason for that is that the first construction commander of the depot said, depots are train stations. Depots are supply facilities.
So tell us about when it started. Truman sort of indicated that it started in 1941. Gave us a little bit of the background. Can you give us a sense for maybe when it started and what was the purpose of the depot to begin with?
Sure. The Franklin Roosevelt administration realized that when World War II started in Europe, things were not going well for England. It's very possible that we would be drawn into the war, and so we needed to be prepared. And so he was undertaking a huge defense buildup in this country. And that necessitated, of course, congressional expenditures and authorization, and Roosevelt wanted bipartisan support. And so he reached out to Congressman John Tabor, who was the congressman that represents Seneca County at the time, and he was the ranking Republican on the House Appropriations Committee. And there is speculation that some kind of an understanding was reached that for his support, that one of the military bases that the Roosevelt administration wanted to establish would be located in his congressional district. And the mid-Seneca County site, which is shown in these maps that you're looking at, was the site that was chosen to provide a storage of weapons, a munitions base for aircraft that would defend the northeast part of the United States from Washington, D.C. on up till Maine. And there's this map is showing where that Seneca Ordnance Depot was located. And the next year, 1942, a naval training station was also located nearby on Seneca Lake. There are obviously many logical reasons that can be given as to why this site was chosen rather than 60 other some sites that were under consideration. This site had a railroad line that was on both sides of what became the depot. They were looking for an area that was not heavily populated, that was close to the Atlantic coast, but not right at the Atlantic coast. And so this fit the bill as a remote agricultural area. The land prices were cheaper than were many of the other sites under consideration. It was perceived that the inhabitants of the area were true patriots that would be willing to give up their land and that they aren't going to mount any opposition to it. And of course, as I alluded to just a moment ago, there is the speculation that politics was the factor, that Congressman Tabor's support was crucially important.
So you mentioned the shale earlier. We had a show on with a geologist that explained why the shale was there. And this is just an interesting little tidbit, piece of trivia to know that that was one of the contributing factors to having the Seneca Army Depot be in Seneca County. So tell us now a little bit about the backstory of the people who originally owned the property.
Well,
How were they compensated at all, or how was the land? I mean, we realize it was during a war, so sacrifices had to be made. But tell us a little bit about that.
it wasn't until mid-June of 1941 that there was any public announcement that this area was actually the chosen site for this depot. And the lands that were selected were primarily farmlands, people growing cash grain crops or uh, grapes or other kinds of fruits and so on. And there were over 100 farm families that were dispossessed, as the term is being used. They were dispossessed of their property. Now, this is and here you see a picture of one farm couple, and in their area, the farmers were given only 3 days' notice to vacate because that's where the first construction work was going to take place. Most of the farm families that were being dispossessed had a few weeks that summer to move off the property. But you need to understand that this is a real hardship for these farmers. Many of those farms had been in the family for several generations. And although federal appraisers came in and they were going to pay the owners the property value that they considered appropriate, how do you put a dollar and cents value on the emotional ties that these farm families had? The government was quick to take over some of these properties, and it was during harvest season. And the government was going to pay them for a crop that they weren't going to harvest because they wanted to take the land so quickly. And that was especially troubling for farmers to see their crops not harvested, especially when you consider we're in the late years of the Depression and there were these newsreels at the movie theaters showing how people were in breadlines in urban areas and so on. It's a real hardship.
So tell us, we have just a few more minutes left. Tell us a little bit about the operations at the depot. Uh,
As
did they have nuclear weapons there?
During World War II, the role of the depot expanded greatly. And then in the mid 1950s, in addition to being a supply base, the northern part of the depot became a storage site for tactical nuclear weapons of the Army, probably the largest such storage site in munitions based igloos. And you see here the storage of facilities. This particular building that you're seeing right now was a false thing to disguise for the Soviets that it was in underground, that building, that the fuses for these tactical nuclear weapons were being stored. Here you see a picture of the last nuclear bomb being removed from the depot. As the Cold War demises, they don't need these tactical nuclear weapons for the Department of the Army.
So in the end, and unfortunately, I don't have the picture of the demonstrations that occurred in the 80s there. For some reason, it didn't come through. But in the end, it closed. So what were the reasons that it eventually closed? Was it because the Cold War
Well,
was over, or that? there were other things that the Army should be doing.
The demise of the Cold War is the major factor. But there were other bases that were being closed, just simply it was a part of a process called BRAC. When the nuclear weapons were withdrawn from the north end or the Q area of the depot, it seemed like an identity crisis just simply followed. And in July 2000, the depot was formally closed.
Now, obviously they were aware of the white-tailed or the white deer, as Truman suggested. Is there a way that they incorporated that into? Did it give them a sense of unity or of culture just within that base itself?
Well, when the depot closed, the lands were turned over to Seneca County government, which turned it over to the Seneca County Industrial Development Agency. That IDA tried for several years to market the depot areas, and in 2017, Earl Martin and his associates uh, were able to buy the property, and Earl Martin has very wisely and very graciously allocated a large amount of the acreage to be Deer Haven Park, preserve the deer, the white deer, and other waterfowl and animal life that is there.
So tell us, whoops, that's not you, that's me. Tell us a little bit about the book that you wrote concerning the depot.
In 2011, local historians, we did a series of programs to commemorate the 70th anniversary of the depot, and we were gathering so much information. We said we needed to put out a book because there isn't a book on the Seneca Army Depot. And the History Press did publish the book called The Seneca Army Depot, Fighting Wars from the New York Homefront. It traces the history up to 2011, and a large portion of the book is also interviews that we conducted with people that had different kinds of connections with the depot. They worked there and so on. And that book is available Amazon, Barnes and Noble, from the History Press directly. There's also an e-version of it.
The Seneca County has lots of different history associated with it. We just have a couple minutes left. Do you want to just give us a couple bullet points of some of the history that Seneca County has and maybe what people can do to experience it?
Well, you can go to the Sampson Military Museum and you will see things about the depot, but especially about Sampson Naval Station, Sampson Air Force Base. Of course, Seneca Falls is the birthplace of the women's rights movement with the July 1848 convention. Uh, there's several wonderful museums in Seneca Falls. In Waterloo, there is the National Memorial Day Museum. You can see the three bears in Ovid, the only set of public buildings of Greek Revival style architecture anywhere in the United States. Town of Fayette has the beautiful Rose Hill Mansion, which is a wonderful example of Greek Revival residential architecture. Also, we're in the process of honoring Robert Duncanson, born in the town of Fayette in Seneca County, who is one of the most important Black artists, a wonderful landscape artist of the Hudson River School style, but he was living in Cincinnati, Ohio at the time. So he's a big one of west of the Allegheny Mountains.
Well, Walter, thank you very much for being on this week's show, the State of Greater Western New York Report. I'm sure that we'll ask you back some point in the future because there are a lot of things going on in Seneca County, and each one really merits its own special show focus on so that people can go learn more about it and maybe see it hands-on, that sort of thing. So thanks again, Walter, for being here, and thank you, everyone, for being available to watch the show. Yes, each week, every Thursday at noon, We offer the show live to invited guests only, and if you want to go, just go to well, actually, you can see at the bottom of this thing here how you might be able to get on that invitation list. So again, that's stateof.greaterwesternnewyork.com. Ask for an invitation, be put on the invitation list, and we'll be sure to do that with you. So, Walter, again, thank you very much for being a part of today's show. And everybody else, thank you. We'll see you again next week.